The courtroom didn't erupt. No shouting, no chaos, just a judge leaning forward and a warning that stopped everything. That's how it began. Not with a bang, not even with tension, but with something colder, more exact, like the kind of silence that doesn't wait to be filled, only obeyed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince Harry sat there, face forward, hands loosely clasped, surrounded by walls that have heard far more scandal than most of us can imagine. But something was different this time. And if you looked closely, you could see it in the expressions around him, the soft shift of eyes, the nearly imperceptible shuffle and posture. The judge hadn't even finished speaking, and still, you could feel it. Something had cracked. The British press is calling it a breakdown. Royal commentators are calling it a reckoning. But what really happened inside that courtroom, what was actually said, and more importantly, what wasn't, is far more unnerving than any tabloid headline dares admit. Because this wasn't just a tense moment in a lawsuit. It was the moment a prince realized the system he once outran had finally caught up with him, on its own turf and on its own terms. And the stakes? They aren't just about whether Prince Harry wins or loses a case against the publishers of the Daily Mail. They go deeper. They touch on something far more personal and far more dangerous: credibility. Public, legal, emotional. So here's the question I want you to sit with as we pull back the curtain. What happens when someone fights so long for the truth that the courtroom stops listening? Because that's the paradox here. That's the uncomfortable contradiction at the heart of this case. Prince Harry wants accountability. He's demanded it again and again, across interviews, across memoir pages, across press tours, podcasts, TV screens, Netflix specials. But now, in the one room that actually can deliver accountability, something's gone wrong. Something subtle, something slow. And this week, it started to show. Not in fiery exchanges, not in open rebellion, but in retreat, in a judge's carefully measured words, in the sudden absence of legal allies, in the unnerving quiet that followed. And I'm going to take you through all of it, not as gossip, not as outrage fuel, but as a slow, precise unraveling of a moment that might end up defining not just this case, but the entire public arc of Prince Harry's transformation. Because this is no longer about the paparazzi. It's no longer about stolen voicemails or vendettas against tabloids. It's about the man who took on the institution and now finds himself watched by another one. So let's pull this apart, piece by piece, moment by moment, misstep by misstep. And we'll begin with the warning itself, the line that dropped like a stone in that hushed courtroom and sent ripples no one expected. But first, you need to understand the context. Because this trial didn't start last week. It started years ago, in the shadows of pain and loss and fury. And Prince Harry has never let us forget that. He's been very clear. He blames the press, deeply, unshakably, for the death of his mother, for the destruction of his mental health, for the breakdown of his relationships, for the torment of his wife, and for the exile of his family from the monarchy. And if you followed his public statements even loosely, you've heard the phrase, the unchecked power of the press. That's the target. That's the thing he's fighting, at least in his words. And that's why this lawsuit was so personal from the beginning. Harry alleges that Associated Newspapers Limited, the publishers of the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday, illegally obtained personal information about him over the course of years, through unlawful methods, secret recordings, stolen medical records, intercepted voicemails, private investigators. The list is long, the language is sharp, the accusation is massive, and make no mistake, this is not a casual claim. It's not some defamation lawsuit slapped together in frustration. This is a full-blown legal assault on one of Britain's most powerful media entities. And for a while, it seemed like Harry was winning. Because there's one thing the press has always underestimated about Prince Harry. He doesn't quit. Say what you will about him, love or loathe him. When he locks onto a mission, he commits with force. But that's the double-edged sword. Because when you bring that kind of fire into a courtroom, into a space built on precision, restraint, and order, you have to know where the lines are. And if you don't, the very system you're trying to hold accountable might end up turning the spotlight on you. And that's exactly what's happening. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you saw a legal team suddenly fracture mid-trial during a high-profile public case? It doesn't happen. Not like this. Not without a reason. But in Harry's case, it did. And just days before that, the judge issued what some insiders are calling an unprecedented warning. He didn't call anyone out by name. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words landed like a slow-motion collapse. And that was when the temperature in the courtroom changed. What we know, and what we'll explore throughout this exposé, is that something behind the scenes triggered that shift. It wasn't random. It wasn't just courtroom theater. It was real. And depending on who you ask, it might be the moment this entire legal war began to unravel. But we're not there yet. Right now, you need to sit with this. A prince who once walked behind his mother's coffin as the world watched in silence. A man who left his homeland to escape relentless scrutiny is now seated in a courtroom, under scrutiny, fighting a system that no longer looks entirely sympathetic. And I'll say it plainly. This isn't about whether Harry is right or wrong. That binary doesn't work here. This is about something more fragile. Trust. Trust between a plaintiff and the court. Trust between the evidence and the truth. Trust between a man and the mission he's been chasing for nearly a decade. And when trust erodes, inside a courtroom, it doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just vanishes. And when that happens, who speaks for you? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it sound like when a courtroom holds its breath? Not the dramatic gasp of television dramas. Not the pounding gavel. Not even the hush that sweeps a room before a verdict. It's quieter than that. Slower. More invisible. It sounds like papers no longer being shuffled. Like a clerk's pen pausing mid-word. Like an attorney turning slightly, but not moving their feet. It sounds like restraint. And restraint is precisely what collapsed when the judge leaned forward, just slightly, and issued a warning that carried no exclamation point, but still felt like thunder. Let me be clear. This wasn't a case of courtroom chaos. There were no raised voices. No lawyers lunging for microphones. No dramatic outbursts from the gallery. But what unfolded was, in many ways, more unsettling. Because everyone in that room, from the presiding judge to the clerk in the back corner, understood the weight of what had just happened. And not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. Now, if you weren't following closely, you could have missed it. Some headlines barely mentioned it. Others twisted it into spectacle. But those who were present, those who know the etiquette and choreography of British high courtrooms, felt the shift immediately. It wasn't just a warning. It was the kind of moment that signals something deeper. The court no longer views you as simply a participant. It's now watching you. And when that happens, when the court stops treating you like a claimant and starts treating you like a liability, it doesn't announce itself with a verdict. It begins with subtle, irreversible recalibration. That's where Prince Harry found himself. So let's walk back into that courtroom. Let's sit down, quietly, in the second row, behind the rows of barristers and advisors and whispered translations, and look around. It's a modern courtroom, yes, but not sterile. Wood panels, high ceilings, a subtle sense of weight in the architecture itself. The kind of place that reminds you that the law isn't fast. It isn't loud. It's deliberate. Harry had entered the room that morning with the same posture he's shown in dozens of public legal appearances. Composed, resolved, emotionally tight. Not smiling. Not glaring. Focused. He wasn't flanked by a team of stylists or press handlers this time. This wasn't a red carpet entrance. This was the return of a man deep in litigation. A man returning not just to the city that made him, but to the system that might unmake him. And for the first half of the day, everything ran as expected. Opening arguments, review of submissions, the back-and-forth rhythm of legal ritual. Until it didn't. Because then, abruptly, and with almost no warning, the judge requested a halt. Not a recess, not an objection, a halt. And when he spoke, his words weren't harsh. They were something worse. They were measured. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. But what he said, word for word, is now etched into legal memory. The court is beginning to question the manner in which this case is being pursued. This is not a matter of spectacle. This is a matter of law. That was it. A single paragraph. Maybe less than 30 words. But those words changed the temperature of the room. Because that wasn't just a procedural statement. It was a rebuke. A veiled one. The kind that judges issue not to scold, but to caution. A warning that the court is watching you now. Not your claims, not your cause, you. And here's where things get tricky. Because to fully understand the gravity of that moment, you have to understand how rare it is for a judge, especially in a high-profile case involving a member of the royal family, to speak like this at all. British courts don't perform. They don't chase headlines. They resist drama. So when a judge breaks that norm, when he interrupts proceedings not to clarify but to caution, it means something behind the scenes is under pressure. And that raises a question most people never ask. What, exactly, was the court reacting to? Was it something Harry said? Was it a strategic misstep by his legal team? Was it the tone of the filings? The media frenzy? Or was it something deeper? Something that had been building over weeks, even months, and finally surfaced in a moment too subtle to scream, but too serious to ignore? Because here's the truth. Courtrooms don't shift moods by accident. And they don't issue warnings without cause. So what was the cause? That's where things begin to fragment. Sources close to the proceedings, those inside and around the legal teams, have offered whispers. Not confirmations, not leaks, but whispers. And the most consistent of those whispers is this. The judge was responding not just to courtroom conduct, but to the broader tone of the case. Let that sink in. Not a single quote, not a dramatic outburst, but tone. Tone in how the case was being framed. Tone in how the submissions were written. Tone in how the claims were being escalated beyond their evidentiary weight. That's subtle, but it's damning. Because tone, unlike facts, is interpretive. And once a court starts questioning tone, it starts questioning intent. And once it questions intent, it's no longer about what you say happened. It's about why you're saying it the way you are. That's where Prince Harry found himself. The man who had built his case on emotional memory, on trauma, on righteousness, suddenly confronted by a system that demanded something colder, cleaner, less personal. And that contradiction, the man seeking justice through deeply personal pain versus the system requiring legal distance, crashed right there in the courtroom. The warning wasn't just about conduct. It was about framing, which leads us to an even more uncomfortable question. Has Prince Harry misunderstood the rules of engagement? Has he brought a memoir's voice into a legal arena that doesn't accept sentiment as strategy? Let me pause here, because this is where things begin to wobble. There's no denying Harry's pain. No denying the decades-long antagonism between him and the British press. No denying the loss, the exposure, the manipulation, the grief. But in a courtroom, none of that is enough, unless it's grounded, verifiable, controlled. And when that emotional narrative starts to bleed into the structure of the case, courts grow uneasy. So when the judge issued that warning, it wasn't just a procedural note. It was a line in the sand. And the reaction? Telling. Some legal analysts noted a visible shift in the room's energy. Others reported that members of Harry's legal team exchanged brief glances, tight, unreadable. One insider claimed that a junior solicitor left the courtroom moments later, never returning. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not, because what followed in the next 48 hours was even more baffling. A sudden, quiet fracture within the legal team. No official announcement. No press release. Just absence. And the silence around that absence may be the most deafening signal yet. Why? Because lawyers don't walk away from winnable cases. Not without pressure. Not without risk. And especially not when the client is one of the most globally recognized faces alive. So what happened? What changed? Why did a case that began with moral clarity and righteous momentum suddenly stall? First in tone, then in trust. The judge's warning was the first sign. But it won't be the last. Because if there's one thing we've learned from this chapter, it's this. The courtroom doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Sometimes, it just has to stop listening. And once it does, the consequences are quieter, but far more lasting. But here's the problem. What came next wasn't just subtle. It was decisive. And by the time the public realized something was wrong, the damage was already done. Is it really about phone hacking? That's the question that lingers under every headline, every court filing, every strained expression from Prince Harry as he steps into the High Court. On paper, yes, it's about allegations that Associated Newspapers, publisher of the Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday, illegally obtained private information. That's the lawsuit. That's what the case is officially titled and structured around. But if you stop there, you miss everything. Because the courtroom, as it turns out, isn't just a stage for legal truth. It's a crucible,